Okay, so you ready to like jump into this? We're talking about Gaza today, and specifically this wild proposal from Trump about the U.S. taking it over
Yeah.
and like turning it into a Middle Eastern Riviera.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds crazy.
Yeah. I know it sounds like something out of a movie, but it's like a real idea he's put out there.
Yeah.
And it's been all over the news, and we've got some really interesting reporting from CNN that kind of takes us behind the scenes of how this all came about.
So it's like a total curveball, right? I mean, nobody expected this.
Yeah, it really seems like it came straight from Trump himself. Like he just kind of decided this was going to be his thing, you know, like completely bypassing any kind of normal policy development process.
Like the normal channels.
Exactly. And, you know, you have to think about the context here, right? Like the U.S. has been so involved in trying to make peace between Israel and Palestine for like decades.
For so long.
And this would be just like throwing all of that out the window.
Yeah. So how did this whole thing even like come about?
Well, it all starts with Steve Witkoff, you know, Trump's Middle East envoy.
Right.
So Witkoff goes to Gaza, and like he's just blown away by what he sees. I mean, buildings are collapsing. There's no running water, no electricity.
Oh, yeah.
Like the threat of disease is everywhere. He's basically saying this place is unlivable.
It's just a total disaster.
Yeah, total disaster. So he goes back and tells Trump all about it. And you can almost picture it, right? Trump, the real estate mogul, starts thinking, okay, how do we fix this?
Yeah, he's thinking like a development project.
Totally. And he even says it right. We're going to clean out Gaza and make it habitable.
Yeah.
So like right there, you can see he's already thinking long term.
Yeah, but it's so different from everything he said before about foreign intervention.
That's what makes it so crazy, right?
Yeah.
Like he spent his whole presidency criticizing nation building, you know, especially what the Bush administration did.
Right, all those entanglements.
Yeah, exactly. And now he's the one proposing this like massive intervention.
It's like a complete 180.
Totally a fascinating paradox.
So what does this Middle Eastern Riviera actually look like? Like, is there more to it than just a catchy phrase?
Well, Trump's talking about turning Gaza into this like international hub, you know, with a booming economy.
Right.
All the modern infrastructure you could want.
So like a total transformation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He keeps talking about Gaza's amazing coastline and how much potential it has for development.
So he's thinking like resorts and high-rises.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And a huge tourism industry.
But, I mean, realistically, how do you even begin to implement something like that?
Like you said, it's a complicated region.
Super complicated.
With a ton of history.
And not to mention the current humanitarian crisis.
Oh, yeah, that's a huge part of it, too.
So what was the reaction like when he announced this?
People were shocked. Like his own officials were totally blindsided.
Really?
Yeah, there's this one quote from a Middle East advisor who was like, I was stunned when Trump brought it up.
So nobody knew this was coming?
Nope, not even his cabinet members.
Wow.
And get this, even senior Republican leaders were caught off guard.
Oh my God.
Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, he found out by watching TV.
No way.
Yeah, it was a total mess.
So if everybody was so surprised, who was actually on board with this?
Well, Netanyahu seemed pretty happy about it.
Really?
Yeah, he was totally supportive. But even with Netanyahu backing it, there are some serious obstacles to overcome.
Like what kind of obstacles?
Well, just think about the logistics of it. You're talking about relocating the entire population of Gaza.
That's millions of people.
Exactly, millions of people. So where do they go? How long are they displaced? Can they even come back once this Riviera is built? It's a nightmare.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
And who's going to pay for all this?
Right. And even if you could figure out the money and the logistics, there's still the huge issue of trust between Israel and Palestine.
Yeah, that's been the problem all along.
Exactly. Like, can you really imagine them both agreeing to this?
It seems pretty unlikely.
Yeah.
So it sounds like this whole Riviera thing is more about Trump's mindset than anything else.
I think you're right.
Like he's approaching it like a real estate deal.
Totally. And you can see it in how he talks about it, you know, always emphasizing Gaza's location and how much money it could make.
Right.
Remember what Jared Kushner said last year about how valuable Gaza's waterfront is?
Yeah, I remember that.
It all ties together.
So they're seeing dollar signs instead of the human side of things.
Yeah, that's a very different way of looking at it.
Definitely.
I mean, are we even thinking about the people who actually live there?
Right. Like, what would this plan mean for the millions of Palestinians in Gaza?
Well, that's where things get even more, you know...
Complicated.
Yeah, complicated. Even if you could somehow, like, wave a magic wand and make all the logistics and politics disappear.
Yeah.
You still have to think about the human cost.
It's a huge population to displace, even temporarily.
Exactly. And, you know, we can't forget the history here.
Right.
We're talking about a population that's already been through so much displacement.
Yeah, the Palestinian refugee issue goes way back.
Way back, like to the creation of Israel in 1948.
Right.
And a lot of the people in Gaza are descended from families who had to flee their homes then.
So basically, they're being asked to relocate again.
Exactly. And even though it's being framed as like this positive development, you know, the Riviera,
right,
there's going to be a lot of resistance and skepticism.
Yeah, I can see that.
You can't just ignore that historical context, you know?
Of course not.
And the cultural sensitivities and just the anxiety that people are going to feel.
Makes sense.
You have to take all of that into account.
It seems like this whole plan depends on a level of cooperation that just doesn't exist in that region.
Yeah, I mean, even getting countries like Jordan and Egypt to agree to accept displaced Gazans would be a huge challenge.
Right. They haven't exactly been welcoming to refugees in the past.
Exactly. They've always been hesitant to take in large numbers of Palestinians.
Because they're worried about their own stability.
Yeah, economic and social stability.
And then there's the whole issue of Hamas.
Oh, yeah, you can't forget about them.
They control Gaza, right?
Right, and they have a completely different vision for the future than the Palestinian Authority, which governs the West Bank.
So basically, you've got these internal divisions on top of everything else.
Exactly, and it's hard to imagine them putting those differences aside to support something like this.
Yeah, I mean, this conflict, it's not just about land or economics. It's about so much more.
It is. It's about identity and historical grievances and deeply held beliefs.
And you can't really solve that with a real estate development project.
Exactly, no matter how fancy it is.
So where does that leave us? Is this whole Middle Eastern Riviera idea just a fantasy?
It's tough to say for sure, but I think it's important to, you know, even if this specific plan goes nowhere, it still raises some really important questions about the future of the region.
Like what kind of questions?
Well, for one, it makes you think outside the box, right?
Yeah.
Like the traditional ways of trying to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict haven't worked.
Right, they've been going at it for decades.
Exactly. So maybe we need some like totally new ideas.
Even if they sound crazy at first.
Yeah, even if they sound crazy. And then there's the question of what role the U.S. should play.
Right.
Because this proposal, it's like a shift from being a mediator to being much more directly involved.
Much more interventionist.
Yeah, exactly. And that has all sorts of potential consequences.
Both good and bad.
Both good and bad. We don't know. Would it actually help bring peace, or would it just make things worse?
Yeah, that's a good question. And what about the economics of it all? I mean, a Middle Eastern Riviera could potentially boost the whole region.
Right. It could create jobs and stimulate the economy.
Yeah.
But then you also have to think about the potential for inequality.
Right. Would the benefits be shared equally?
Exactly. Or would they just go to a select few?
Yeah. And what about Palestinian workers? Would they be treated fairly, paid a living wage?
Those are all crucial questions.
So many questions, and I don't know if we have any answers yet.
I think that's part of what makes this whole topic so fascinating.
It is.
It really forces you to think about these complex issues and to consider different viewpoints.
And to imagine what kind of future we want to create.
Exactly. I think it's important to have these conversations even if they're difficult.
Definitely, because this conflict, it affects us all.
It does, whether we realize it or not.
So why does this matter to our listener? Why should they care about something that might never even happen?
Well, for one thing, it gives you a glimpse into how Trump thinks, you know?
Yeah.
He's still a powerful figure on the world stage.
Right.
And understanding his motivations and his worldview, it can help you make sense of what's going on in politics today.
And even if this Riviera plan never happens, it still shows us that things in the Middle East need to change.
Yeah, the status quo isn't working.
Not at all. And we need to be open to new ideas.
Even if they seem radical.
Exactly.
And, you know, maybe the most important thing is that it reminds us that behind all the politics and the economics, there are real people whose lives are being affected.
That's a good point.
The people of Gaza, both Palestinians and Israelis, they deserve a future with peace and security.
And opportunity.
And it's up to all of us to work towards that.
It really makes you think about how these big ideas can affect people on a personal level.
Yeah, it's like you said, you can get caught up in the glitz and glamour of a Middle Eastern Riviera, but at the end of the day, we're talking about real people's lives.
Their homes, their futures.
Exactly.
So going back to that question, is Trump's vision for Gaza actually realistic, or is it just a pipe dream?
I don't know if I'd call it a pipe dream. It's definitely ambitious, and it would take a ton of cooperation from everyone involved. But I think it does highlight one important thing. The situation in Gaza right now, it's just not sustainable.
So even if this specific plan doesn't work, it at least forces us to acknowledge that something needs to change.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for years, the international community has basically just been trying to manage the conflict.
Right, providing aid, making statements.
But that hasn't really gotten us any closer to a real solution.
And Trump, love him or hate him.
Right.
He's at least made people pay attention.
Yeah, he's made us question the status quo.
So maybe that's his legacy in a way, shaking things up.
It's an interesting thought. Sometimes it takes a really out there idea to get people thinking differently.
So what does all of this mean for our listener? Why should they care about this whole thing?
Well, it shows you how the world is changing.
How so?
Like the old rules, the old alliances, they're not as solid as they used to be.
Things are shifting.
Exactly, and that's going to affect everything.
Right, from economics to global security.
And it reminds us that even when people are out of office...
Like Trump.
Yeah. Their decisions can still have a huge impact on the world.
It's a reminder to stay informed and engaged.
Absolutely. To ask questions and hold our leaders accountable.
So to wrap things up, we've really dug deep into this idea of a Middle Eastern Riviera in Gaza.
Yeah, we've looked at how it came about.
The reactions it's gotten.
The challenges it faced.
And the motivations behind it.
And we've also talked about what it all means on a larger scale.
For U.S. foreign policy.
And for the future of the Middle East.
It's a complex issue.
It is, but hopefully this deep dive has helped you understand it a little better.
And maybe spark some of your own questions.
Yeah, keep thinking about it, keep learning, because the future of Gaza, it really depends on all of us.
Making informed choices.
Having these tough conversations.
And taking action to create a better world.
That's what it's all about.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
See you next time.